Good morning, colleagues. Secretariat, do we correct?
Good morning, Chair. Yes, there's currently 8 members on the platform.
Okay. We'll have to start. The meeting is officially open. We've got a challenge of electricity. There's load shedding here at our parliamentary village. So I can't put on the camera. I'm using my iPhone. As I've said, that the meeting is officially open. Welcome members of welcome the support team of SCOF, PBO Legal Services, Communication Services, and all other services in Parliament. Welcome Treasury. I'm not sure which other entities here, but
recording in progress.
Be that as it may, we welcome Treasury. Welcome the media, other stakeholders who are in the platform. Then let's move to the next item. Apologies. Are there apologies?
Mr. Matwale won't be attending, I think, for the remainder of this week as well. He's got a family bereavement.
Yes, he has notified us. Honorable Maswale has lost his brother, Thabang Maswale, in the Eastern Cape, Umtata. May the soul of Mr. Thabang Maswale rest in eternal peace, and condolences to the Maswale family. And then let's move to item 2. Briefing by National Treasury on the Public Procurement Bill B18 2023. Treasury, over to you.
Good morning, Honorable Chair and honorable members.
Good morning.
Mendo Kasana. We are ready to present the bill. We would recall that we were here and there were comments that were made that we are going to present today. And at this particular moment, I will give over to our colleague from legislation, together with the policy person. But I must start with the fact that in terms of the introduction and the purpose and the background, we'll give that, and we'll have the process that we have followed and our strategic intent and how we have arranged the chapters and the general overview of the bill. And I think the bill, I do want to sort of say, we have been to the state law advisors, and the that would be clearly outlined in terms of the processes that were followed in terms of that process. I think just before I get to the bill, to the introductory part, let me just give over to Mr. Mathebula just to highlight this issue that relates to the Office of the Chief State Law Advisors and the process that we had followed when we went to Cabinet. Yes, over to you.
Good morning, Chair, and honorable members of the committee. Yes, it's true. My name is Willie Mathebula. I'm the head of the supply chain management policy, norms and standards at the Treasury. Chair may recall that we had an informal discussion on the 23rd of May, where we took the committee through the content of the bill. At that time, we still had some of the issues, that the state law advisor was busy with. But safe to say, Chair, that there isn't much that the state law advisors submitted lately, just before the bill was tabled on the 30th of June. There was just one issue around the use of technology. It was just more the structuring of that particular clause in the bill, which they submitted to us at the time. And subsequently, they certified the bill. From a constitutional point of view, and hence the bill was tabled on the 30th of June in Parliament. So I thought I must just bring that particular issue. And we're hoping that the representatives from the state law advisors would also be here, based on their indication yesterday, Chair. So if I may just continue, because we did present, nothing much has changed from what we presented in May, but we're just going to give the committee at least the highlights of where we are currently. The issues around where we came from and the directive of cabinet, of course, on the modernization of the procurement, public procurement system is well known, Chair, over the period. So that culminated in, can you just move to this? Yeah. Of course, the issues around the bill having to regulate public procurement and to prescribe the framework within which the preferential procurement must be implemented. And the background, of course, is Section 195 of the Constitution, as is spelled out, the high standard of professional ethics, efficient, economic, and effective, and also issues around accountability and transparency. And of course, Section 216 of the Constitution that talks to the development of norms and standards, uniform norms and standards, culminating into Section 217, of course, which is also well known, Chair. You can just move, yeah. Then the constitutional provisions, Chair, on subsection 2 of 217 allows organs of state to implement a procurement policy that provides for categories of preferences in the allocation of contracts and the protection or advancement of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination. Now, Section 217, subsection 3, requires that there be a framework within which Section 2172 would be implemented. And That's the base for at least that the preferential procurement, which is one of the chapters in the bill. As you would know, that currently we have the triple PFA, which of course would be repealed as one of the piece of legislation that would be repealed. And the other thing, Chair, we did indicate that the procurement system in the country is fragmented. There are a number of laws, of course, some of them conflicting and so on. So that's the reason why we have this bill, at least to have a single national overarching regulatory framework in procurement in the country. You can just move, yeah. And it is also important and necessary considering the history of South Africa and the developments since the coming into operation of to have a legislation which creates a single framework regulating procurement in line with all other applicable stipulations of the Constitution, and which contributes to address the economic and social challenges in the country. This particular slide, Chair, just illustrates the kind of fragmentation that we have and where we are going to. As you can see, the left side talks about the current system, and then the future, of course, it's on your right-hand side of that slide there. And of course, the bill introduces flexible legislation, specifically on preferential procurement. The Chair may know that currently the preferential procurement only provides for empowerment through preferences. But going forward, there are multiple preferences that the bill proposes, like localization, people that were historically disadvantaged and so by unfair discrimination. And it also provides for Black economic empowerment, small business development, as well as women, children, and people with disabilities. So it's quite a flexible bill going forward. And the bill also introduces the Central Procurement Authority in the form of a public procurement office that will regulate and the public procurement in the country, for all spheres of government. If you can just move. And the process followed year to date is also indicated there. What process was followed right from 2014 to where we are currently. It's highlighted there, Chair, but I don't need to go into details on those issues. This is still just a continuation of the process that we followed. The bill went through NETLEC processes and so on. The socio-economic impact assessment, foresight, and also cabinet, and leading to the tabling thereof to Parliament on the 30th of June. This particular slide talks to the responses to the Zondo recommendations, Chair, as is presented, of course, by the President on the 25th of October last year to Parliament, and then some of these issues that Judge Zondo raised. Just this indicates in what part of the bill are those issues covered. As you can see, a code of conduct is in clause 9 and 10. The protection of accounting officers and accounting authorities who, to be insulated from criminal or civil liability on the basis of acting in the interest in good faith. So that particular part is also provided there in clause 54 of the bill, and the harmonization of the legislation to public procurement is also in there, as you'd know that this bill will cut across all spheres of government. The better guidance and training of public procurement officials is also in there, and that's one of the issues that Zondo raised. And also the clear guidance when you procuring from a sole source is also provided in clause 18 of the bill. As you can see, these are just some of the issues that were raised by Justice Zondo. And then this is just a continuation, Chair. The standards of transparency are also provided in clause 5 and clause 27 of this bill. And then the appropriate management, contracting, reporting, and enforcement guidelines is also provided for in clause 19. And then the compliance and the transformation, of course, in clause 5 in the main, and clause 6. And also it allows the PPO, which is that Public Procurement Office, to investigate any issues of non-compliance. The lifestyle audits as well for all senior managers and officials involved in SCM is also in this particular bill. Sorry, is to be contained in the employment legislation for officials. So it's not in this bill particularly. And then the professionalization of the system is also was also referred to by Justice Zondo, and it's not provided for here, but Treasury will develop a framework for the establishment of a professional body. The next slide, Chair, talks to the issues that were deliberated on at NEDLEC, where we agreed, and in some areas we did not agree as social partners. Firstly, there was an issue, contentious one, that the NEDLEC social partners raised, particularly business and labor, around incentivized whistleblowing. And we did not agree on that particular proposal to be covered in this bill. But of course, the president did, pronounce on it, and it would be dealt with, of course, by a different department in government, which is justice, through the PDA. So the one other issue was more on integrity as well, on clause 12 of the bill, where Labour thought that we should strengthen that particular clause to create a better public monitoring of politically exposed persons and their networks. So there was also an argument there. So both business and labor agreed, but as government party, we disagreed with that particular labor's proposal. But we thought that role should be for procuring institutions and not necessarily in the bill itself. The one other issue that was raised, Chair, were in general provisions, which is Chapter 7 of the bill, was the strengthening the proposal by Labour to strengthen to ensure proactive disclosure of procurement information by procuring institutions. And also there you had business and labor agreeing. From a government's point of view, we thought that the strengthening thereof should be determined by instruction rather than having it as part of the bill. And the Public Procurement Office, of course, will determine the requirements for disclosure of information by procuring institutions. And this is covered in clause 27 of the tabled bill. Just move B. The one other issue was around infrastructure provisions in the bill. The business was of the view that infrastructure was not provided adequately in the bill, at least to deal with the underlying structural weaknesses in the public procurement system. And this is one issue where Labour, of course, business had suggested that we should take the information that was presented by the JSRs, which were appointed by NEDLEC to assist, but Labour did not have a position on this matter. And from a government's point of view, we took a position that the issues around infrastructure and capital assets would be issued in terms of regulations by the minister, because the infrastructure by its own very nature is quite complex and diverse. You've got a number of sectors and subsectors, so you can't have just one, piece of provision in the bill dealing with infrastructure. We can just move a bit to the next one. Then the strategic intent of the bill. I'll hand over chair to Madam Nswatlan, the CPO, to take you through this particular one. Thank you.
Thank you, Honorable Chair, once more. I think what the purpose of the bill, as we all know, it's really going to assist in elevating the public procurement into a single statute level with a distinct custodianship through the PPO office in National Treasury and specific functions that would be for national treasuries. It will also prescribe the framework for the preferential procurement that is envisaged in the sections that have already been mentioned in terms of section 2173 and 2174 of the Constitution. We would note that in terms of section 217 with sections 195 and 2161, public procurement will create one legal framework on which all public procurement activities will be governed in one statute, with enabling different types of prescripts for the different types of procurement that we're still going to go through. The second issue would relate to the preferential procurement, through which all these public procurement activities will be governed in one statute, with flexible measures that may be customized to unique social
You are muted.
It looks at the strategic overview and relates to what do we currently have and where do we want to move to. Note that we have got the PPPFA and the regulations, and we've got the PFMA and its regulations and instructions, including the MFMA and the SCM regulations, and 31 other acts that are related to procurement. And for the future, in terms of what you are about today, those would be dissolved into the Public Procurement Act with its regulations and the instructions and policies that would have. As it has already been alluded to, Honorable Chair and Honorable Members, this bill would create a single regulatory framework for public procurement, which would, amongst others, determine general procurement requirements, providing for a preferential procurement framework, establishing the PPO office within National Treasury and defining its functions appropriately, and also defining the functions of the provincial treasuries and the functions of the procuring institutions and the measures that would ensure the integrity of procurement processes, including access to procurement processes and information. It would also provide for the power to prescribe different methods of procurement and bidding processes, the use of technology in procurement, providing for dispute resolution mechanisms, and enabling regulations, among others, to have different prescripts for the different types of procurement. Providing for the repeal and amendment of certain laws and inclusive of the regulations that we have. The next part will be also done by Mr. Matebula in terms of the arrangements of the chapters. Suffice to sort of say we've got 7 chapters and will take us at a high level on the issues that relate to the chapters. Thank you.
Okay, can just go. The Chair, thank you very much. Chapter 1 is more definitions. As you could see that we've got definitions on a number of aspects, capital assets, emergency infrastructure, open data and procuring institutions, PPPs, strategic sourcing and transversal term contracts. And then also procurement is also defined in there. You can just move. This is just a continuation of, this is the objects now, the bill. The object of the bill to introduce uniform treasury norms and standards for all procuring institutions to implement their procurement systems as envisaged in section 2171, read together with section 2161 of the Constitution, and also to determine a preferential procurement framework for all procuring institutions within which to implement their procurement policies. So this is the object of the bill. It also sets out the minimum requirements for uniform norms and standards, such as value for money, which has always been an issue, and the ethical conduct and the combat of corruption, the advancement of transformation, beneficiation, and industrialization. In chapter 1, the application, this will apply to all spheres of government, if I can just put it that way in summary. And then chapter 4 provides for the preferential procurement. And then there is also thinking that chapter 4 should also be made applicable to parliament and provincial legislatures. Then chapter 2 deals with the institutional arrangement. This is now the PPO office that we spoke about earlier on, its role, the provincial treasuries, their roles, and procuring institutions, their roles as well in terms of what they should do and not do in procurement. Of course, the functions of provincial treasuries are there. The public procurement office, the functions and roles are also in this particular slide, Chair. And also the duties of procuring institutions are set out in clause 8 of chapter 2. Chapter 3 deals with the integrity and prohibition of certain practices, and of course, the debarment of those that are mischievous, Chair. That's what it provides for. What steps are going to be taken, and also the tribunal, the code of conduct, and then also what institutions should do to identify automatically excluded persons and their family members, immediate family members. And of course, it also requires persons involved in procurement or a person related to official to disclose. It talks to disclosure. And 12 talks to the prohibition of any person from unduly influencing a procurement process. This chapter continues, of course. It talks about the debarment orders to bidders or suppliers or any of the directors, members, and so on by the PPO under specified circumstances. Of course, a due process is required. We always apply the Audi. And of course, the power of the PPO to prohibit certain procurement practices and protection of employees who refuse to take directions, of course, inconsistent with the bill. So that's provided in chapter 3, clauses 16. In chapter 4, Chair, this is a chapter that is informed by Section 2173 of the Constitution. The current PPFA that we have will disappear. You'll see in the schedule that completely this PPFA will be repealed, and this would be taken over by this particular chapter, Chapter 4. And as indicated earlier on, Chair, besides just the empowerment preferences, this particular chapter provides for a number of other preferences like localization, industrialization, beneficiation, empowerment for women, youth, and people with disabilities, consideration for small businesses and Black economic empowerment. Now, it requires the minister, prior to issuing any regulations in this particular chapter, to consult with his counterparts, especially from the DTI, small business, women, people with disabilities, and then any other minister whose portfolio is affected by the draft regulations. So that's chapter, there are regulations that we developed talking to all these different preferences that are provided for. So there's a little bit of, let me say, a substantial departure from the current system where you're only looking at one area. This one is much broader, Chair. Thank you. And then chapter 5 deals with procurement systems and methods and related matters. It talks about the procurement system, strategic sourcing, and then this is where also we referred to earlier on around infrastructure and capital assets. There would be regulations developed out of this particular chapter, the disposal and letting of assets, and the types of procurement methods, and of course, different methods of procurement. I know that currently everybody thinks that the open competitive is the only procurement method that we should follow, but there are a number of methods that the bill proposes should be followed, to make it easier for government to deliver on services. And then it also provides for the use of another organ of state to render services. This is also provided in chapter 5. MP. And then it talks about a procuring institution establishing procurement units, and then measures to prevent abuse, and the bid committee system, and then also the use of technology for procurement. It's provided in here in this particular chapter, Chair. Chapter, if you can just move. Oh yeah, the Public Procurement Office, it talks must progressively develop an information and communication technology based procurement system for all procurement to enhance efficiency, effectiveness, transparency, and integrity, and to combat corruption. And the procuring institutions are also to use technology in procurement and the components of the ICT procurement system as they became operational. Then the PPO as well, to determine by instructions measures for public, civil society and the media to access procurement processes, and the provisions made for measures to ensure candid deliberations and protecting officials from undue influence and threats. The clause 27 talks to the provisions regarding access to and disclosure of procurement information, and the access for authorities to procurement information held by procurement office and provincial treasuries are provided for in clause 29. And also the protection of confidential information and personal information in line with the Protection of Personal Information Act is dealt with in clause 30 of the bill. Chapter 6, clauses 31 to 49, Chair, deal with dispute resolution. The chapter in clause 31 provides for a right of the bidder to seek reconsideration by a procuring institution of its decision to award a bid. And if dissatisfied, of course, then the aggrieved bidder may approach the tribunal for a review of a decision. And it provides for the establishment of the tribunal, Public Procurement Tribunal, its composition, the qualification of members, and other relevant provisions for the functioning of the tribunal. And also the tribunal, has powers to review a debarment order issued by the PPO against a bidder or a supplier. And the procuring institutions prohibited from awarding a contract during the reconsideration or review proceedings. Any party dissatisfied with an order of the tribunal may, of course, institute a judicial review in terms of purge. Then Chapter 7, which is the last chapter, Chair, from clause 50 to 61, it empowers the Public Procurement Office to investigate any procurement-related matter for purposes of checking whether there is compliance in terms of this act. And then clause 53 empowers the Minister and the Director General at Treasury, the accounting officer of a procuring institution, to delegate functions. So the Minister may delegate, the DG may delegate, the PPO and the Provincial Treasurer may also delegate functions. And the bill also provides in clause 55 for the criminalization of conduct of any person who knowingly gives false or misleading information or evidence or interferes or exerts undue influence on any official and or a member of the tribunal in the performance of his or her functions, and anyone who connives or colludes to commit a corrupt, fraudulent, collusive, or coercive or obstructive act related to the procurement, and it all causes loss of public assets or funds as a result of negligence. These are general provisions, Chair. Clause 56 to 57 provide for limited powers to grant exemptions from the Act and for deviations from regulations and instructions. And the Minister of Finance, of course, is empowered to make regulations regarding all matters specified for regulations elsewhere in the bill, such as preferential procurement matters, a procurement system, procurement methods, including PPPs and the transversal term contracts, and the use of another organ of state, of course, for goods and services. Provisions also made for regulations on variation of contracts procedures, for lodging procurement complaints by public and procurement using donor or grant funding, and a public consultation process as well as parliamentary scrutiny of draft regulations are contained in clause 58, 2, 3, and 4. Provision is also made for regulations for different categories of procurement institutions and different categories of procurements in clause 58. It is compulsory that specific regulations must be made for infrastructure and capital assets, and goods or services related to infrastructure and capital assets is also provided for in this chapter. Then the proposed amendments and the repeal of certain laws provided for in clause 60 and are contained in the schedule which is attached to the bill, Honorable Chair. It includes the repeal of the PPPFA Act of 2000 as we know it, and the number of other pieces of legislation. Some of them would be amended to some great extent, and some, just to make sure that all these pieces of legislation, there are almost about 30 of them, are aligned to this bill. And as to commencement, it is provided that the provisions may be brought into operation on different dates, and also on different dates for different categories of procuring institutions or different categories of procurement. That takes us to the end, Chair. Thank you very much. Handing back to you, Chair. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thanks, National Treasury team, for the presentation on this bill. Let me invite honorable members to ask clarity-seeking questions and or make comments. Honorable Shivambu, Honorable George, Honorable Manya. Let me note all of the members who have raised their hands. Honorable Manya, Honorable Abram. Yes, Honorable Shivambu, over to you.
No, thank you, Chair. I'm struggling to capture the real essence of this legislation that is being introduced here. And the context I'll give you, Chair, is that a procurement legislation in 2023, like literally a year before the so-called democracy in South Africa reaches 30 years, should necessarily have transformation objectives and intentions which are clearly stated. And at the center of the counter transformation that has defined all procurement legislation thus far has been the central emphasis on price as the primary determinant of who can provide which services or goods to the state. Is that being amended? Because if that is not being amended, there won't be any changes. So if you say that the transformation obligations will only account or amount to 10% of the adjudication criteria for certain services that has to be provided to the state, you're not changing anything because the established and much more grounded and historically empowered role players in whatever space will always have a strategic and permanent advantage. I'm not getting that in this context. That is one, but two, we had argued as the EFF, even in our elections manifesto on several occasions, the point that procurement by the state should be an instrument that is utilized for localization, in the sense that we should state clearly in legislation that certain goods and services and products that the state procures, inclusive of even professional services, should be local. Like, we should have a threshold that is legislated and clear, so as to enhance and also be a catalyst for some real and meaningful economic activity here in South Africa. I'm not getting that sense from this legislation. And I'm also worried. I think the manner in which the bill was introduced and presented there is, to be fair to the presenter, it was extremely lackluster. There can be even a far much more better way to characterize that, because how do you say, yeah, we're amending and we're going to repeal some legislations, about 30 of them, and then you want us as lawmakers to just say we're going to amend some legislations without saying which legislations are you going to amend. And then we must then agree to a law that is going to amend about 30 plus legislations that we are speaking, but you don't even say which ones are those and which clauses are going to be amended. It's a very problematic manner in which this was introduced. And I think that we might need a better and much more comprehensive introduction of the legislation so that we were all aligned. But if the whole public procurement bill does not seek to redress the imbalances of the past, which, by the way, were reproduced by all procurement legislations post 1994, I don't think this legislation is taking us anywhere. Both the EFF and the ANC spoke in the 2019 election manifestos about legislating localization in procurement legislation so that there is some degree of state-led and state-inspired or state-driven localization and industrialization that will get to produce the goods and services and products, including cars, by the way, that the state consumes. So we have to look into that in a much more dynamic way than just deal with technical issues which are superficial and will not change the essence of South Africa's procurement legislation. The manner in which it's presented, I don't capture how do we get to achieve a real and genuine transformation of South Africa's economy in a way that is going to provide the much needed jobs and get to uplift the livelihoods of our people. I think we might need to have further deliberations on this, but what has been presented is not satisfactory. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Honorable Schwamb. Dr. George.
Thank you, Chairperson, and thanks very much for the presentation. We all know that we have systemic corruption in South Africa, and that we've had enormous problems with tendering, public procurement, etc. And so it seems that the response to that systemic corruption is then to centralize. It seems that way. So what is going to happen to hold the procurement office to account? So how now, as this all centralized into a central place, how do you then, because this body is going to be very, very powerful and very big and very susceptible, how does that get held to account? Also bearing in mind that we have 3 spheres of government in South Africa. Then why was the whistleblower recommendation from Business and Labour not taken up? Because surely, if there's going to be this relentless centralization of this process in a very small, concentrated place, that would need a lot of scrutiny, a lot of oversight to make sure that it doesn't just become another part of a systemic corruption problem. And then there was silence completely virtually on what is the role of the provincial treasury. Now, it was mentioned sort of tangentially, but we had no detail of what is the role of the provincial treasuries in this instance, and how does that fit in, as I said before, bearing in mind that we have several spheres of government in South Africa. And then also, my last question for now is, where does quality and price feature? Now, we understand that there are quite intricate rules then on preferential procurement. It has been a very long time since we've had our democratic elections. And crucially, what we have a problem with in South Africa is that we simply don't have enough money to provide services for various reasons, which I won't go into now. But price and quality and efficiency is fundamentally important, obviously, when you have so much money going through a system. So I want to know, where does that fit in? Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Dr. George. Honorable Manyu.
Thank you, Chairperson. Good morning, everyone. Mine is going to be short, Chairperson, because Honorable Shivambo has already covered most of the points. But just briefly, I think when he started, Honorable Shivambo said something about being confused. I think I'm even more confused as to what exactly we're doing this morning. Because in South Africa, we also have something called National Development Plan. In terms of that National Development Plan, one of the key issues to restart the economy of this country is the issue about building the capacity of the state. So what we are dealing with this morning is not building the capacity of the state. We are actually outsourcing the capacity of the state. So in other words, we are now here being asked to actively undermine the National Development Plan, which talked to building the capacity of the state. What we should be discussing this morning is how the state aims to build capacity within itself to provide the services that it is preparing to outsource to other people right now. So the first point for me, Chairperson, is to say this discussion is really misguided because it does not help to achieve the National Development Plan, which the country has signed up for. So that's the first thing. Now, the second thing is that even if you look at the detail of what is being presented in this bill, again, to the point that Honorable Shivambo has made, I'm struggling to understand what is it that we are trying to do here. And the reason I'm struggling, Chairperson, is that, firstly, I think it would have been much more honest for the bill to be clear as to why are we doing this in the first instance. What was wrong with triple PFA? What was wrong? Why are we doing this? Because we had triple PFA and things were running in a particular way, but why then did we need triple PFA? The reasons that are now being put about centralizing and all of this were not the reasons that the market was responding to triple PFA about. The key issue why triple PFA failed, the key issue why there were problems with 2017 triple PFA regulations is because of empowerment-related issues. The big problem was that with the 80-20, 90-10 situation, it meant that people that were disadvantaged continue to be disadvantaged because they don't have the economies of scale and the wherewithal to compete on an equal footing with those that have been in the space for longer. Also, that would have been enabled by also even apartheid government and all of that and so on. So triple PFA had more emphasis on Section 217, subsection 1 of the Constitution, had an overemphasis on that section and played lip service on 2172, which talked to empowerment, even with the Constitution saying nothing in subsection 1 should prevent an organ of state from actually implementing Section 2172. But still, that law continued to use Section 2171 of the Constitution as the guiding light. Now, the challenge I have with going through this one in detail, Chairperson, there's a lot of, this bill is too big, and there's a lot of stuff about centralizing governance, this, that, and all of that. That's not the reason we have a problem, Chairperson. The reason of the problem is the empowerment issue. Now, what this bill has done, it has changed words, and actually this annoys me because it's almost like we're being made as if we're being fooled, Chairperson, here. What has changed here fundamentally is the wording. We have changed from 80-10, 90-10 to a new wording called value for money. Now, everything that looks flowery about empowerment and all of that is subject to value for money. So we're back to 80-20, 90-10 in a back door. This is how 80-20, 90-10 used to discriminate against those without the wherewithal. Because when you say value for money, it's going to be impossible for Ndate Maponya to compete toe-to-toe with Raymond Ackerman, because Raymond Ackerman will always give you value for money because of the economies of scale and all of that. So if we have value for money that is not even having any other kind of conditions attached to it for empowerment, this is really a waste of time. I mean, even if you look at the treatment of the treatment in this bill of localization, it's just a by the way. It's not even the central theme of this bill as we had envisaged it to be. So, Chairperson, I think I agree with Honorable Shivambo that we really need to go back to a drawing board if we are to do a proper thing. Otherwise, this rush of this bill now can only be seen very skeptically as just another hurried attempt to create all kinds of patronage enablement for 2024, because we know that whenever there's procurement, you can always assume there will be corruption. So this is just going to enable corruption. I really think, Chairperson, I want to support the view by Honorable Shivambo that let's go back to the drawing board. I think the key issue that we should do when we go to the drawing board is to be honest. This bill is not honest. This bill is another triple PFA with another name. We've just replaced 80-20 with 80-20-90-10 with the value for money. The rest of everything else that is there, Chairperson, is just things that were always there and all of that. We have not done anything, Chairperson. So I want to conclude by saying we really need to go back to the drawing board. This bill does not address the purpose, and the purpose must be empowerment. You cannot have empowerment if you want to create equality of unequal people. There has to be preference. You know, government plays with terms. I mean, with triple PFA, the first P is preferential, but there was nothing preferential about that law. You know, we just play with words, and now we have here all the flowering things, but there is this hidden thing here called value for money. So value for money, what does it do? It takes you back to all the principle and all the disenabling things that were there in the 80-10, 90-10 principle. So, Chairperson, this morning is not being properly utilized. We're undermining our intelligence here this morning. We're undermining the NDP. We are frustrating the project of transformation. That's what we're doing this morning, Chairperson. So I support Honorable Shambo that this bill should not be supported in its current formulation. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Honorable Moin. Honorable Abraham.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much. Good morning, and good morning to all the honorable members and officials from Treasury. Chair, as ANC, we are not going to pretend as if we're hearing this bill for the first time. As stated before, we have had this briefing before, and we have raised our questions on the bill. Our questions were not questioning the essence of the bill per se, but we were dealing with the content and how different it will be from others. And therefore, Chair, we still continue with that, because when we first heard about it, we did not, as a committee, dismiss it. So I do have some clarity questions that I need to punch into the bill as presented. My first question is the issue of transparency, because we need to talk to the areas that we think are weaknesses in the bill. We cannot throw the baby away together with the water. How does the bill seek to address transparency in the procurement process? That's my first question. I'm happy, Chair, that I heard the presenter speaking to the bill, talking about preferential procurement in terms of the previously disadvantaged, which included the women, people with disabilities. But I heard a mention of children, and I wondered whether it would not be proper to make use of the term youth instead of children, because in reality, how are we going to ensure the participation of children unless the feeling is that we can make use of the term children and youth interchangeably? The other area that made me happy about what the bill is doing is the area of dispute a resolution. And I just want to know what the process would then be in ensuring that disputes are resolved. The other area, I had Mr. Matebula speaking to the issue of the lifestyle audits, which is a long-awaited practice, and whether we are talking about the audit that will start with the passing of the bill, or is there a process of a lifestyle audit that is in place? Because my interest flowing from that question, Chair, is how then are the public officials going to be held accountable for unethical and corrupt practices? Because when we talk about those, we're all in agreement, but I'm asking a specific question. How will the bill hold public officials accountable? Now, Chair, my second last question talks to the proposed timelines for the bill, for the implementation of the bill. And lastly, what will be the outcomes and benefits of its implementation? And I think this question will also answer some of the questions that some honorable members have raised, including the honorable members of the EFF. Thank you so much, Chairperson.
Thanks, Honorable Abraham. Let me also make a comment or ask a question. Thanks very much, presenters. The issue of political exposed people or persons is problematic in the manner that it is practiced in South Africa. Because our relatives, our family members are not members of parliament, including my children. So for them to be always to be subjected to a subjective way of when they submit applications, you are a children of Joe Maswanga, you're children of Abraham. When we are not dealing with tenders, say a member of parliament has got nothing to do with procurement. Our responsibility is to pass legislations, do oversight, and do outreach. But our families are subjected to wrong kind of scrutiny. You are a child of so-and-so, you are a cousin of so-and-so, who has got nothing to do with procurement. Procurement is done by officials in the departments and organ of states. And I don't know why this thing is ever overemphasized, because in my life in government, I don't remember even politicians sitting in bid committees. There is a process through which procurement follows. Issuing out a tender, people apply, then it goes through the evaluation done by the junior officials. From there, it goes to a bid committee. From a bid committee, it recommends the DG, the HOD, or the municipal manager does the what you call issue out the letter to say that this have been approved. But those officials and their families, there's nowhere where it is said that they are exposed. Their families are exposed, and the families of officials who are responsible for SCM should also be subjected to the same manner in which families of politicians are subjected. I think this is wrong, and it was intended for a wrong purpose. And it is prejudicing our families unnecessarily, and I don't think it should be something that we should be happy about. If you can say, me, as Joe Maswangai, as a member of parliament, I should not come closer to supply chain, fine, I should not do that, and I'm not expected to do that. But for my family to be subjected to the same rules as me as a member of parliament, I think is very wrong, and it should be reviewed and be properly defined if it's still applicable. The issue of the tribunal, I just want to find out if you are going to establish a tribunal which is going to be responsible for reviews and all range of other things, how much capacity will this tribunal have to conduct reviews? In the current circumstances, where cases are taken to court for reviews, sometimes those cases take 2 to 3 years, because you find the court roll is there are so many cases that have to be dealt with in a court of law. If these reviews come from organs of state, SOEs, which are 700, municipalities, which are 284, government departments, and will this tribunal have capacity to deal with all these reviews coming from all organs of state? If it takes 2 years, does it mean that for that 2 years, there should be no service of providing water to the people of Mutititi in Limpopo, because somebody has taken the tender for a review, and then the community, which is supposed to be the recipient and the beneficiary of such a service, gets disadvantaged because of the review? I'm not sure. Just clarify as to what is it that this is going to be all about. Of course, the issue of transformation, as raised by colleagues, cannot be compromised. We're not in this struggle just for cosmetic purposes. We're in the struggle to transform the lives of our people. I see somewhere here, you said that the Minister of Finance will consult the Minister of Trade and Industry and other ministers responsible for, I think Honorable Knox has raised that, children, youth, and women, and so on. Why is it not that we make a provision for that here in the law and not leave it to other consultations outside the law? When this law was initiated, one of the issues that came out very strongly was the issue of preferential procurement. And it should come out very clear in the law. It should not be subjected that ministers somewhere else are going to go on a consultation processes. Just clarify that as to what are you talking about. Are you talking about regulations which will have to be drafted after passing the law? But the law should be unambiguous when it comes to issues of transformation and preferential treatment. We know that there are right-wing movements that have always been taking government to court when it comes to issues of preferential procurement. Those loopholes should be closed, and we can't be apologetic about the issue of preferential treatment for people who have been disadvantaged for more than 350 years of apartheid. You know, if you want to behave as if there was no colonialism and apartheid, that subjected Black people to a slavery kind of treatment for more than 350 years. I don't know in which country will you be living in. The ground is not leveled in South Africa, and it's still very far from being leveled. It's like patriarchy. You want to behave as if there's no patriarchy in South Africa or in the world. Where are you living? So the issue of transformation through preferential procurement, I think it should come out very clear. So, Mr. Matebula and your team, please clarify all these questions that, as members of Parliament, we have asked you to clarify. Over to you.
No, Chair. Just quickly, I think this was a problematic input by one of the members of the ANC who says that we can't question the essence of this bill because it was presented before. There was no bill introduced here. Even the presenter himself, he said that there was an informal talk about it here, when certain issues that had to be clarified. We carry the right and obligation to question the essence of the legislation, and then we then must come. We are the lawmakers ourselves. It's not government that is lawmakers. It's us as members of Parliament who are making the laws of this country, and we carry every right and obligation to make the law in a manner that we think represents our people. Thank you.
Okay, Honorable Bushwam, the issue of the process will be clarified, because seated here as the chairperson, for instance, I got some letter from some interested parties, which are even suggesting that we have to postpone the public hearings. I can see here somewhere there's a chapter where National Treasury outlined the process. Mr. Matebula and your team, can you also tighten that chapter? I think Alan will communicate with you and send you the letters that we have received from stakeholders, where there is where there's a group of stakeholders which says no, they are not happy. This bill is not in its own, in the old form. There has been a lot of changes and so on and so on. So, but Mr. Shwamba, I think Honorable Abraham was clarifying the issue of a process which I think will be tightened. Over to you, National Treasurer.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much, and really appreciate the questions from honorable members. I was wondering, Chair, but I would be guided by you, just in response to the questions around localization, professionalization, as they were raised. I'm not so sure if we can just flight at least maybe that chapter. It's going to be very short, Chair. We're not going to take my chapter 4 of the bill. If I can just ask my colleague here to just flight it for the members so that you can just see what issues, if we can respond to particularly the issues that are being raised. Of course, Chair, if you look at that chapter, it's chapter 4, it makes provision for a policy for categories of preference in the allocation of contracts and the protection or advancement of persons or categories of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination. And it also refers to the broad-based Black economic empowerment of 2003. The policy envisaged in this chapter must include one or more preference point systems and thresholds. So in other words, the 80-20 and the 90-10 is history. It's not going to be part of this particular chapter because the PPPFA is being repealed through this bill. And it talks to the measures regarding preference for a category or categories of persons or enterprise or a sector, goods that are produced in the Republic and the services provided in the Republic. And it also provides for measures to set aside the awarding of bids to promote any of the preferences referred to in B above, subcontracting as well. It also talks to advanced transformation, beneficiation, industrialization, innovation, creation of jobs, intensification of labor absorption and economic development, It also talks to balance the economic impacts of imported goods or services unless the procuring institution is exempted by the minister. So this talks to the importation. It also talks to advance a sustainable environment. And it goes on, Chairperson, to say regulations must be made regarding the application of subsection 2. And then without limiting the generality of subsection, the policy must include the preferences for citizens and permanent residents of the Republic, small enterprises as defined in the National Small Enterprises Act, enterprises based in townships, rural, underdeveloped areas, or in particular province or municipality. And then persons in subsections include but are not limited to Black people as defined in the broad-based Black economic empowerment, women, people with disabilities as defined in the Employment Equity Act. A youth, Chair, I must at least correct myself around using the word children. It's actually youth as defined in the National Youth Development Agency. Now, the question that the Honorable Chair is directing us to do, we're taking note thereof, is 6, where there should be consultation, because out of what you see now in Chapter 4 will flow a range of regulations dealing with all these issues that we've referred to above. But we take note of the fact that perhaps it's something that we need to put here in the law rather than leaving it to the minister to consult with other ministers. And at least we've taken note of that path. I thought maybe let me just at least point to this particular chapter and also reiterate the fact that the 80-20 and the 90-10, which has always been the subject of long debates in the country, and as Treasury, we've made commitments for quite some time that we will at some point in time deal with the PPPFA. So the PPPFA that provides for 80-20 and 90-10 is being repealed. And then, Chair, if you look at the schedule, I just want also to respond, if my colleague will just fly to the schedule. The schedule right at the end of the bill provides the list of the pieces of legislation that are going to be amended or repealed. The first one, the State Tender Board Act, which is still in statute, although dormant at the moment, will be repealed in its entirety. The National Supplies Procurement Act will be repealed as a whole. The Housing Act, there are certain sections of the Housing Act of 1997 that would be amended. The National Water Act would be amended. The CETA would also be amended. The CETA Act, Correctional Services Act would be amended. The PFMA itself would also be amended. You can just go down. The Road Traffic Management Corporation Act is also proposed to be amended. The PPPFA, number 9, will be repealed in its entirety. The local government, and etc. CIDB Act as well, that deals with construction sector, is also part of the schedule. So if you look at the schedule, we do specify what piece of legislation would be amended or repealed and what sections specifically of those pieces of legislation where we are not repealing in entirety but amending. We're also pointing out what those sections are that are going to be amended. So this schedule at the end there at least provides that detail, the broad-based Black economic empowerment. We're also going to make amendments therein. You've got quite that list, Chair, if I may just share with the committee and members, and also emphasize the point that localization, as indicated, industrialization, local industrialization is now provided for in Chapter 4. The only thing that remains is, of course, the issue around the the development of regulations that we talk specifically the format that localization will take, industrialization and so on, including all these other provisions that we've referred to. Thank you, Chair. We can just and then the one other issue, Chair, that I want to respond to. I know Honorable George raised an issue around the whistleblowing issue. Now, Chair, we were not as Treasury opposed to whistleblowing per se, not at all. We just disagreed on whether this particular bill is the relevant piece of legislation where whistleblowing should be provided for. That's one thing. And we're of the view, because we had to engage also the Department of Justice to say, in our own view, because corruption cuts across, it's not only located in procurement, but it's a cross-cutting kind of phenomenon. Therefore, we believe that the relevant piece of legislation that should accommodate whistleblowing is your Protected Disclosure Act, which is currently managed by the Department of Justice. So that's one thing. Then the second part where we debated at NEDLEC was around incentive. Whether do you really want to incentivize and pay people, because Labour was proposing 100,000 per incident, or on successful prosecution, and say then whoever is reported a case should then be incentivized, be given 100,000. And we're very careful insofar as that is concerned, because we were of the view that reporting corruption or any mischief is a function, it's a moral obligation by everybody, rather than incentivize people. So that's the issue that we said it should be. And we were glad that at least the Department of Justice, as we speak right now, is dealing with that particular issue of whistleblowing. And the role of PTs are also clarified, provincial treasuries are clarified in the chapter that deals with institutional arrangement. I think it's chapter 2. The roles of the provincial treasuries, including the PPO, which is, of course, outlined in that particular chapter. Value for money, of course, our view is that value for money, we should be in a position to achieve value for money and transformation together. That's the point that we've taken, to say value for money should include all these other elements that we're speaking about. Whether you're talking price and quality, you're talking also transformational issues. It's quite important that the principle of value for money captures all those issues. So they are not mutually exclusive, Chair, in our view. But of course, we're taking the comments that we're getting from the members of the committee, and we really, really appreciate that. The other issue, Chair, I will leave to my colleagues to talk to, especially around lifestyle audit, the timelines, the issues around the capacity of the state as being raised. I'm sure my colleagues will also help to clarify those issues. And insofar as corruption is concerned, I mean, you can also look at the bill in its entirety. I mean, every chapter, at least of the bill, does refer to the measures to combat corruption. But as you know, Chair, that you also have law enforcement agencies in the country that are also responsible for dealing with issues that relate to corruption. So this piece of legislation talks to that and what measures should be taken, and what collaboration should there be between the procurement in institutions as well as law enforcement agencies to deal with issues of corruption. The other issues, Chair, I'm sure my colleagues will also respond to political exposed persons. And if I can at least hand over to Advocate MP van Schoor to kick in and to deal with some of these issues. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I think I will come on the issue that relates to transparency. If we look at chapter 2 on the functions of the Public Procurement Office, section 5D, it does say that the Public Procurement Office must, in accordance with this Act, develop and implement measures to ensure transparency in procurement. So it does cover that. If we then again go to to 26, section 26, you find that the heading says access to procurement processes. The Public Procurement Office must determine by instruction measures for the public, civil society, and the media to access procurement processes, which relates to transparency, scrutinize procurement, and monitor high-value items. We go over to section 27, in terms of the disclosure of procurement information. The office, the PPO, must, by instruction, determine requirements to disclose information regarding procurement. If you look down, all of the issues that are raised there, you can actually see that we will still continue in the trajectory of being transparent, because currently now, transparency in terms of our systems, we are able to do that. But in terms of the Act, I just wanted to highlight the areas. Thank you.
Good morning, Chairperson and other colleagues. Firstly, I want to deal with the question about centralization. I think it's quite important to note that decision-making on procurement will still vest in the particular institutions, whether it's a department, a public entity, or municipality, and that's reinforced in Clause 7 of the bill. Now, in terms of the role of the PBO, firstly, the Minister, apart from the Act regulating procurement activities, to some extent, the regulations by the Minister will, in further detail, prescribe a number of matters, and then there's certain powers for the Public Procurement Office to issue instructions. In our view, it's not that much different to what's currently the position under the PFMA and to some extent under the MFMA. The MFMA only provides for regulations, not for instructions. But there's clear indication about what must be prescribed by the Minister, and then also touching on the issue of, especially on the regulations for the chapter on preferential procurement. It's quite clearly set out also in the provision that deals with the regulations in general, Clause 58, that there must be consultation with the public, there must be parliamentary scrutiny. This is now over and above the provision specifically on preferential procurement, where there's the requirement to consult ministers, specifically in regard to localization, the Minister of Trade and Industry. Then on the second matter that was, or another matter that was raised by the chairperson about, we don't use the term politically exposed persons in the bill. What is provided for in Clause 13 is what we call automatically excluded persons from tendering, and that would include public office bearers and a number of other people. For instance, an official may not tender for something in his or her institution, but there is no prohibition on the family members of, for instance, public office bearers to not participate or to submit a tender. Then there's also, there is provisions in Clause 11 where a procuring institution must identify immediate family members. And this is also to ensure that in the procurement process, that there is not undue influence by such immediate family members, but they are not precluded from submitting a tender. Then on the issue of dispute resolution, just to briefly explain again, there's two possibilities. The first port of call is the procuring institution may reconsider a decision to award a tender. So there's no other kind of dispute resolution in relation to other matters. It's only on a decision to award a tender. And then if the particular tender is not satisfied, they may take the matter on review to the tribunal. Now, there's timelines prescribed for the processes specifically for reconsideration by the procuring institution, and there's also a timeline prescribed or the detail, a cut-off date for the tribunal to consider. And then as to stalling processes, there is a standstill process during this review process, but again, it will be limited by the prescribed periods, some of them in the Act and some would be in the regulations. And then during that period, if there's an emergency to address for the particular goods or services to be procured, there is a provision that may proceed, then may be procured from the tenderer who were actually awarded the tender. Then, as to the capacity of the tribunal, I think it's quite difficult to say how many reviews will be received. That will be over time. That will be, we will know that better. But I think the important thing is that this is a tool or a mechanism proposed to avoid less cases getting to court, where the process is much longer to deal with or to deal with the dispute. That the tribunal will be an expedited process to deal with disputes about procurement decisions. Then there's another side issue, which is there is provision that for complaints by the public also about procurement processes that will be detailed in the regulations. Then on the matter of lifestyle audits, there's a limited provision in Regulation 58, Clause 58, that provides for lifestyle audits of automatically excluded persons and immediate family members. The details thereof is not further, that it will be dealt with within regulations. But the lifestyle audits, as my colleague indicated, for officials of procuring institutions involved in procurement, in our view, is a matter that should be dealt with in employment legislation. And the Department of Public Service and Administration done some work on that, and hopefully that will find its way into either, if it's required, primary legislation or subordinate legislation. Then the question about the implementation of the legislation once it becomes law, the important part is once we have the final bill as passed by Parliament, is to finalize or finally develop the regulations that are required, and where applicable also instructions. But I think this is one of the areas that should enjoy priority is Chapter 4 on prudential procurement, because as you know, we are currently dealing with the PPPFA, and where we have very limited regulations to deal with the transformation issues. So that area could be prioritized first, and then the other matters be dealt with. And then, as my colleague, Mr. Mutubula, explained, there is provision to bring different provisions of operation on different dates, and also there are particular procurement regulations for particular types of procurement, or, for instance, to focus first on national government or on provincial government or local government in terms of reforming the procurement rules for those particular categories of institutions. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you. Are you done from your side, National Treasurer, with clarity from members? Okay. I see. Follow up. Honorable Manye, Dr. George.
Yeah, thank you, Chairperson. Maybe let me be succinct so that the officials are able to respond succinctly. Number one, I raised the issue of the building the capacity of the state, and I argued that what we're doing is not building the capacity of the state. And Mr. Matebula there that gave me the impression that someone is going to address that, but that has not been addressed. So I'm still arguing that what we're doing here this morning is to undermine the National Development Plan in terms of building the capacity of the state. We're outsourcing the capacity of the state. So that's the first issue. The second issue, Chairperson, I am not convinced with this explanation around value for money, because some of us have been in this space and we know what that means. You can't have National Treasury officials here telling us that everything has value for money and all of this, and at the same time expect to achieve empowerment. There is a price for empowerment. There is a premium for empowerment. My challenge, Chairperson, is that this bill does not provide premium. There has to be a premium, Chairperson, if we are serious about empowerment. If you are going to, there's a saying that equal treatment and equal people is unequal, and that be to do is to treat both equal. This is why they do this value for money. Go from is very different.
Honorable Manya. Hello, Honorable Manya.
And
Honorable Manya.
yeah.
We are losing you, Honorable Manya.
Hello,
we did not get it clear what you were asking. The latter part was not very clear because you have got a problem of connectivity where you are. Oh, okay, it got disconnected. I hope it will come back. Let me, in the meantime, recognize Dr. George. When Honorable Manya gets better connection, I will allow him to come back and restate his questions. Dr. George.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you very much for the answers to my questions. I just wanted to press that particular issue on the provincial treasuries. Now, what I heard said was that the relevant municipality or entity or province would continue to procure as they have before. So I just want to be certain then, where is obviously the Central Procurement Office has this role. So how does it then impact on the provincial treasury and the provincial role as it currently stands? So what will change then? Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. George. Honorable Bushman.
No, thank you, Chair. I think the central point that we are raising in relation to building of state capacity is to say that there are certain functions of the state that do not need an external role player or an external service provider to deal with. We, of course, have introduced the separate legislation in terms of insourcing of government workers in certain sectors and functions in government departments and state-owned companies. But there are certain things which will say that the following functions are not due for procurement. You can categorize them. You can give a list of cleaning services, security, basic things like general work that has to be said. The things that are daily functions of a functional office or functionality of government, like repair of potholes, repair of broken windows in schools, building of bridges in certain areas which does not require a lot of technical skills. All of those things, I think there are certain areas where we say that we should say in the legislations that the following sectors are not due for procurement. The state should have the internal capacity to fulfill its own obligations. That is the essence of what we want to deal with in the state capacity component. And we have, of course, highlighted the centrality and the essence that in areas where it is not advisable, or it is not possible for the state to could do these things internally, then the intention should be transformative, should be aimed, one, at localization, industrialization, creation of sustainable jobs for our people in a manner that is much more durable. That is the essence of our submission, that there must be areas like where we say that these following functions and these following purchases of goods and services are not due for procurement. So that is clear, because currently the state seems to be tenderizing literally everything, including writing letters, including buying of stationery. Like when state wants to buy stationery, there's a tender that we're looking for a supply for stationery, like to buy pens and pencils and notebooks. There must be a tender for that. To write letters by municipalities to remind people who must pay for rates and taxes, there must be a tender for that. And there are certain functions which we need to ring fence and say that these areas are not due for procurement. The state should perform those by themselves. And we can actually, Chair, to help this legislation make a much more substantial input and even propose a chapter in the current framework to say that these are areas which we think must be insulated from any forms of procurement, because there's no need, there's not necessary, they can be done internally. Thank you.
Thanks. I don't see Honorable Manye back in the platform.
Sorry, Chairperson, I don't know, my line is terrible here. I don't know whether I just keep getting cut. But I also... I'm actually at the richest square mile of the continent, but I don't know what's happening. I think I'm being sabotaged. Yeah. Chairperson, I think Honorable Shibambu has covered a lot of my points, but just to summarize quickly some of the issues I wanted to raise. Some of the things that it refers to is what in the past was called set-asides. I think it must be clear, why is it that we don't have set-asides to make sure that we achieve the empowerment goals? Number one. Number two, when I was starting, before I got cut, I was also talking about the issue of building the capacity of the state. Why is it that we are outsourcing the capacity of the state and not building the capacity of the state? And number three, I was saying the issue of value for money, that I just don't like this quick explanation, because the truth of the matter is that value for money is actually a reformulation of 90-10, 80-20, as it were. And therefore, I'm arguing, Chairperson, that this bill must contend with the issue of premium. I don't see premium. And I think that the discussion we should have is what is allowable premium. Because if you are going to say value for money and all of that, it's just a disguised way of continuing with a largely white monopoly capital procurement in a very elegant way. Because in terms of value for money, they can always deliver it, because they've had hundreds of years of doing this thing, and they've got all the wherewithal to do this, including the cost of their funds is much cheaper than everybody else. So I can list a whole range of things that make them deliver value for money more than anybody else. And therefore, if we're talking about serious transformation, we have to talk about premium. What premium are we prepared to pay in order to achieve transformation? It's not going to be for cheap, and it's not going to be value for money. There's going to be a premium. Let's agree. What premium? Is it 10%? Is it 20%? That's a discussion we should have. And then also, Chairperson, I see all these acts that are repealed and superseded and what have you, but in terms of transformation and all of that, we need to be very clear that this act must also supersede the Company Act. So I need to hear something about that. Lastly, Chairperson, I see the reference to Broad-Based BEE Act, and my confusion there is that Broad-Based BEE Act has got a whole range of sector codes, as it were. I don't know what's going to happen to those, because if you have this act here, this public procurement bill here saying it's going to be having a trumping effect on everything else. Now, what happens if there's a sector code, for instance, that is much more progressive than what is being proposed here? So I'm just saying, I think this is another one of those lip services, because now we get told that no, actually, we are going to have a reference to BEE Act, but if there's if there is a progressive clause in the BEE Act, that act will be trumped by this thing that we're doing here this morning. So I'm not so sure how the two are being harmonized, if at all, Chairperson. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Honorable Man. Team Treasury, back to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to the honorable members as well for raising questions. Look, I think the capacity of the state, we understand exactly, what is meant in the context of procurement. In that, we are looking at outsourcing versus insourcing. I think we taking note of what is being said here. Safe to say, Chair, that perhaps it might not be possible through the bill to lock ourselves into specific products that would be procured within the state and those that would be outsourced. Why we're saying so, Chair, and I'm sure the honorable members would remember that we've been talking about the PPPFA for quite some time. The fact that the 80-20 and the 90-10 has always been in that act, and whatever you do to the regulations, trying to change them and massage them, but the fact of the matter, as long as you had the 80-20 and the 90-10 in the actual act, so it became very difficult to change and to amend. So equally, I mean, by the same token, if we were to specify the types of services or goods that must be procured internally within the state without having applied ourselves, and especially in the primary legislation, it might be difficult going forward to amend those. But maybe that's just the context, but we note what members have been saying, and we'll see whether this particular issue around capacity of the state could only be achieved through this bill. That's something that we need to look at, Chair, if that is acceptable. Yeah, and then the issue of value for money as well, and I think we do understand the concern by Honorable Mani, his concerns, and then we'll also look at that and see how can we achieve all these without necessarily responding, giving a knee-jerk response, but I mean to a question that might be bigger than what we thought. So we'll look at that as well, Chair, as part of our review of all the questions that have been posed. The trumping provision also that's proposed, and in the event that you have sector codes that are much more progressive, I think it's something that we also need to look at, because we, in our presentation, we do make in fact in chapter 4 around that consultation with the relevant minister, especially minister in the DTI, who's responsible for the management of the Broad-Based Black Economic Empowerment Act, so that we make sure that whatever regulations are issued do not necessarily clash with what already exists in terms of the progressive sector codes. We're taking note of that fact. Maybe that's the reason we're saying we need to consult as and when we issue the regulations. And then insofar as the premium is concerned, Chair, if you look at the current triple PFA, the maximum premiums payable for your 9010, it's an 11.1% premium that the state is prepared to pay, because that's the premium. And for your 8020, it's a maximum of 25% that the state is prepared. And there's a threshold, of course, in terms of what tenders apply to 9010 and 8020. But I'm just mentioning now, given the fact that we are getting rid of the triple PFA, it's something that we also need to look at, without specifying in the bill here and say this is the premium that the state would have to pay, because it all depends on the capacity of the fiscus to accommodate those things. But the long and short of it is that as we draft the regulations, and by the way, the regulations would also be subjected to the parliamentary process, we will come up with some kind of indication in terms of what would be the possible premium. But unfortunately, Chair, we cannot say here now and say this is what we're proposing, except that we are repealing the triple PFA in its current form. Thank you, Chair.
Let me come in. We would note that in terms of chapter 2, if we look at section 6, those are all the functions of Treasury that they would have to do. And it is quite detailed, even in issues that relate to the different categories of procurement and the different categories of procuring institutions. I wanted to come on that. The other issue that I wanted to talk to relates to chapter 3 in terms of the section 11.3, where it relates to if a person related to an accounting office or other official or a member of an accounting authority, a bid committee or a tribunal, there's a whole range of issues that should be done, like disclosing such interest immediately after receiving the agenda of the meeting of that bid committee. So that is clearly outlined in that section 11.3A and B, and also 4. The third issue that I wanted to talk to relates to the issue of value for money. Would note that value for money is really the achievement of a desired settlement outcome at the best possible price, not necessarily the lowest price. And you have to get to a balanced judgment of financial and non-financial factors that would be relevant to procurement. So it is more or less a combination of cost, quality, and sustainability to meet the requirements. So it does not necessarily reflect to the issues of price. It would go further than that. But that would be more elaborated in terms of the regulations. Thank you, Chair.
Okay. Thanks. I think we're done with clarity seeking questions. From here, in my understanding, the bill was initiated from as early as 2014. So it's 9 years ago. Went through NEDLEC processes, National Treasury processes of consultation with stakeholders. It went through CIAS, I hope. There is a CIAS certificate. Cabinet satisfied itself. And then the bill was tabled in the National Assembly or Parliament on the 30th of June 2023. So the bill now is before the committee and it won't go back. We are the lawmakers. We have got the responsibility to process this bill. We can pass it in its current form, or we can make amendments after we'll have done the process of consultation with the public, that's public hearings. In terms of the parliamentary program, we have issued out adverts to the public that they should prepare themselves, that's the stakeholders who are interested, to make submissions to Parliament next week. So we are going to have public hearings in terms of parliamentary programs. As to those who are saying that we have to postpone the public hearings, we'll respond to them properly and address the issues that they are raising in their letters. After that, of course, the committee will deliberate on the bill, including clause by clause. I think it's at that time that if as members, and also having received submissions from the public, there are clauses that have to be amended or have to be addressed differently, we will do so. Because the bill now is no longer with Treasury. It is with Parliament. It is Parliament that has got the responsibility to legislate. So include the issues that you members have raised. We'll deal with them at the time after public hearings, when we'll be dealing with clause by clause and or deliberations on the bill. Because the report that will go to the National Assembly, it's not the report of Treasury, it's the report of the committee after we'll have satisfied ourselves and adopt the report as the committee. And from there, Parliament will pass or reject the bill. So that's that. Are there other announcements? Alan Tebuho?
Chair, the only announcement is tomorrow's meeting is physical at the parliamentary precincts. It's committee room N515, 5th floor, Marks Building. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. My understanding is that will start at 10, isn't it? Because we've got challenge of buses that leave late sometimes. So that if it's 9 when we are physical, and by 9 members might not have reached Parliament. I saw Tebuho making a suggestion that we start at 10.
Okay, Chair. I'll just update the Z list accordingly, and then the notice obviously to members will also indicate that. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Team Trade, for the presentation on the bill. Thanks very much. You will be there also next week when we conduct public hearings, as the stakeholders will be interested in raising questions that you might that you have to clarify. Thanks, honourable members, and thanks to the support team, PBO. PBO also, Dr. Jankis, you have a brief that you want to send to us as members, or probably next week before we start this public hearing, you might want to make a presentation. But let me know as to how you want to advise us in regard to the bill that has been tabled before us, because it's your responsibility to advise this committee. So let's talk after this meeting. Thanks very much, colleagues. The meeting is adjourned. We'll meet again tomorrow.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
You can see him.
You can see him.
Thank you,
I
Chair.
move.
Yeah, Bule.
Enko, credo.